Marcus Brennan stared at the notification glowing on his phone screen, the numbers refusing to change no matter how many times he blinked. Transaction alert, $47,322.18. Boston Children's Hospital. 4 years of medical debt erased in a single keystroke at 2:43 in the morning, while his daughter slept 30 feet away, her breath steady and careful like everything else about her 8-year-old life. He'd just used a stranger's credit card. A wealthy woman who had handed it to him like a punchline at a charity gala, her friends watching with the kind of amusement people reserve for entertainment they can afford. 24 hours, she'd said. Spend whatever you want. The way she'd emphasized want made it clear what she expected. Waste excess proof that people like him deserve their circumstances. She was watching the transactions right now. Marcus knew how banking apps worked, how the wealthy monitored their money with the same casual attention others gave to weather forecasts. She'd see the hospital payment and think fraud theft exactly what someone like her would assume about someone like him. But Marcus didn't care what Victoria Ashford thought. For the first time in 4 years, his daughter's medical care wouldn't be refused at the next appointment. The collection calls would stop. The credit damage might even begin to heal. 22 hours remained, and the pile of unpaid bills on his kitchen table hadn't gotten any smaller. 24 hours earlier, Victoria Ashford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Marriott Copley's 20th floor ballroom champagne flute, catching Boston's city lights in fractured gold. Below, traffic moved in predictable patterns through streets she'd navigated her entire life without ever really seeing them. Behind her, 200 people in formal wear circulated through the Hearts for Children gala writing checks that would cover the $500 minimum entry fee and not much more their charitable obligations fulfilled until the next social season demanded another appearance. The champagne was her fourth, or fifth. Victoria had stopped counting around the time she'd stopped feeling anything at all. She turned from the window, scanning the room with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd attended too many events exactly like this one. Kate Mercer caught her eye from across the room, raising her own glass in a gesture that could have meant anything. Solidarity, perhaps, or shared boredom. They'd known each other since prep school, which meant they knew each other's surfaces extremely well, and interiors not at all. The Vera Wang dress Victoria wore cost $8,000. The platinum bracelet circling her wrist had belonged to her grandmother. The emptiness inside her chest, where normal people apparently kept emotions, was free, though she'd tried for years to fill it with purchases that never quite did the job. 6 months ago, Brendan Crawford had handed back the engagement ring she'd spent 3 weeks pretending to be excited about. "You're like Ice Vic. I can't love someone who doesn't feel anything." She'd responded with the same cool composure that had defined their entire relationship and thanked him for his honesty and returned to her penthouse without shedding a single tear because tears required feeling something first. The realization that he was right had come later in the small hours when even champagne couldn't blur the edges. Victoria Ashford at 30 years old had never experienced anything resembling genuine emotion. Not love, not grief, not even anger. Just a smooth, glassy surface where turbulence should have been. She moved through the crowd with the kind of grace that came from a childhood of cotillions and country club dinners. The charity existed for pediatric literacy or cardiac care or something equally photogenic. Victoria couldn't quite remember, and it didn't really matter. These events weren't about the cause. They were about being seen, about maintaining position in a social ecosystem where absence required explanation and explanation suggested weakness. The registration table near the main entrance caught her attention only because of the commotion brewing there. A man stood at the edge of the carpet runner, clearly not dressed for the occasion, despite obvious effort. His shirt came from Goodwill or somewhere similar, the fabric too worn to hold a proper press. The jacket's zipper pull hung from a broken tab. His hands bore the particular roughness of manual labor, fingernails clean, but cuticles damaged by work that didn't involve computer keyboards or conference rooms. The registration volunteer, a woman whose own dress probably cost more than the man's entire month of expenses, leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "I'm so sorry, sir. There's a $500 minimum donation for entry." Her voice carried just far enough for nearby guests to pause their conversations. The man's face showed no embarrassment, no surprise, just a kind of weary acceptance that made Victoria's chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. He held a flyer in his hand, the glossy paper creased from being folded and unfolded multiple times. I understand. I thought the flyer said all are welcome. That's for volunteers. The woman explained, her discomfort growing as more people noticed the exchange. I'm afraid for guests, there is the minimum requirement. Victoria watched him stand there frozen in the particular paralysis of someone who'd hoped for one outcome and received another. The moment stretched awkward in public, and something inside Victoria stirred. Not sympathy exactly, and certainly not pity. Something more complicated, a desire to prove a point she couldn't quite articulate, even to herself. To demonstrate the vast distance between her world and his, to see what someone actually desperate would do with actual resources. Or maybe in the deepest part of herself, she rarely examined to feel something, anything, even if it was secondhand. She set her champagne on a passing waiter's tray and approached the registration table with the kind of purposeful stride that made people instinctively step aside. Kate's eyebrows lifted in question from across the room, but Victoria ignored her. Let me handle this. The registration volunteer looked relieved at the interruption. The man looked at Victoria with careful assessment, his expression going deliberately blank in the way people did when they'd learned not to show what they were thinking. Victoria withdrew her Platinum American Express from the Prada clutch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The card felt substantial between her fingers, heavy with credit limits she'd never bothered to check because checking implied concern about hitting them. 24 hours. She slid the card across the table toward him. Spend whatever you want. Kate materialized at her elbow, fascination replacing boredom in her perfectly made-up features. Vic, what are you doing? The man stared at the card like it might bite him. You're serious? Victoria kept her voice level, loud enough for the growing audience of nearby guests to hear. Completely serious. Consider it a social experiment. 24 hours to live like the other half-lives. Let's see what you do with opportunity. Someone behind her laughed, the sound carrying clear acknowledgement of the entertainment value. Another voice murmured something about Pretty Woman in Reverse, which sparked more amusement. Victoria felt the familiar warmth of being the center of attention, of performing generosity that cost her nothing emotionally, even if the monetary amount was theoretically unlimited. The man picked up the card. No thank you, no questions, no emotion crossing his carefully controlled face. He simply pocketed it, nodded once, and walked out through the marble lobby into the November cold. Kate gripped Victoria's arm. Girl, what the hell did you just do? Victoria reclaimed her champagne from a different waiter's tray. Proving a point. What point? That's what we'll find out. Victoria checked her phone, pulling up the banking app that would alert her to every transaction. The man had just stepped outside. No purchases yet, which meant he was either too shocked to act or smart enough to wait until she stopped watching quite so closely. Give him a few hours. He'll head straight for something stupid. They always do. But even as she said it, Victoria felt that strange tightness in her chest again. The unfamiliar sensation that had sparked when she'd seen him standing at the registration table. She couldn't name it, didn't want to name it. Naming things made them real, and Victoria Ashford had built her entire life on keeping reality at a comfortable distance. The after-party filled Victoria's penthouse with the same people who'd been at the gala, just with better alcohol and more comfortable seating. The view from her windows in Beacon Hill showed the Charles River catching moonlight, the water moving in patterns as predictable as the conversations happening around her $12,000 leather sectional. Kate curled into the corner, seat shoes abandoned on the imported rug. Tell the story again, the whole thing. Victoria obliged, settling into the performance aspect of the narrative. The man at the registration table, the flyer clutched in his work-roughened hands the way he'd simply taken the card without a word. She embellished slightly, adding details about his expression that might or might not have been accurate because accuracy mattered less than entertainment value. He just took it. Kate's fiancé, Brendan, different. Brendan, no relation to Victoria's ex, leaned forward with the kind of interest money usually bought. Didn't say anything. Not a word. Victoria pulled up her banking app again, refreshing the transaction screen. Nothing yet. Maybe he's too shocked to actually use it. Or too proud, Kate suggested, reaching for the wine bottle that cost more per glass than the mystery man probably spent on groceries in a week. He knows you're watching. He'll wait until you're asleep. Someone suggested casinos. Someone else predicted electronics, the kind of impulse purchase people made when sudden wealth made them stupid. The theories came fast, each one confirming what Victoria had suspected from the beginning. Given resources, people without discipline would prove exactly why they remained without resources. It was almost a kindness, really, to demonstrate this publicly. A lesson for everyone involved. Victoria checked her phone every 30 minutes, the lack of activity, somehow more frustrating than immediate spending would have been. The man was either very patient or very stupid, and she couldn't decide which irritated her more. The guests filtered out around 2 in the morning, Kate lingering by the door. "You sure about this experiment?" The question carried weight Kate probably didn't intend. 6 months ago, Kate had been the one to suggest Victoria might want to talk to someone about the broken engagement and about the Ice Queen thing Brendan had thrown at her like an accusation. Victoria had declined naturally. Therapy required admitting something was wrong, and admission suggested vulnerability she'd never learned to access. "I'm sure." Victoria held the door, already thinking about the California king bed waiting in her primary suite, the 1,000 thread count sheets that never quite felt warm enough. "It'll be fine. Worst case, I cancel the card tomorrow, and he gets nothing. Best case, I'm proven right about human nature." Kate kissed her cheek, the gesture automatic and meaningless. "Call me when he maxes it out on something ridiculous." But as Victoria closed the door and returned to her empty penthouse, silence pressing against her eardrums, she found herself hoping for something else entirely. Not proof of her worldview exactly. Just something. Some feeling that would confirm she was still capable of having them. She fell asleep with her phone on the pillow beside her, waiting for the alert that would tell her what kind of man she'd just handed unlimited credit to, waiting to feel something about the answer. 23 miles east, Marcus Brennan climbed 3 flights of stairs in a building where the elevator had been broken for 6 months, and the landlord had stopped pretending to care about fixing it. The hallway fluorescent light flickered in the same pattern it had maintained for weeks, casting shadows that made the peeling wallpaper look even more depressed than usual. He moved quietly past Mrs. O'Donnell's door. Maggie worked nights at the hospital, her shift starting at 4 in the morning, and she needed whatever sleep she could get before then. The woman had watched Lily for him countless times, accepting his promises to pay her back someday with the kind of grace that made his chest hurt. His apartment was small. 600 square feet divided into spaces with aspirational names. Living room, kitchen, bathroom. The only real bedroom belonged to Lily because 8-year-olds needed privacy and stability more than 37-year-old fathers needed anything resembling personal space. Marcus eased her door open, watching her sleep in the glow of the nightlight, shaped like a rabbit. She'd picked it out herself 2 years ago, back when there'd been enough money for small luxuries like nightlights, chosen for whimsy rather than function. Her breathing came steady and careful the way it always did since the surgeries. Even in sleep, Lily's body remembered to be cautious. The kitchen table held the familiar pile envelopes arranged in order of urgency rather than arrival. Marcus had stopped opening them weeks ago. The collection notices all said the same thing in slightly different words: pay us or face consequences. The consequences had already arrived. His credit was destroyed. His employment prospects remained non-existent. The only thing keeping them housed was the landlord's apparent reluctance to actually execute the eviction notice buried somewhere in the stack. He sat down, pulling Victoria Ashford's platinum card from his jacket pocket. In the dim light from the fixture above the table, the card looked like something from another dimension. Platinum. He'd never held a platinum card before, didn't know anyone who had. The weight felt different from regular plastic, substantial and serious. She thought he would spend it on himself. Marcus understood this with perfect clarity, reading it in her tone, her posture, the way her friends had watched like he was performing bare at a circus. They wanted a show. They wanted confirmation that people like him couldn't be trusted with resources, that poverty stemmed from character defects rather than circumstances. She wanted to be right. Marcus picked up the first envelope from the pile, sliding his thumb under the flap he'd been too afraid to open for months. Boston Children's Hospital. Patient account number BCH 2021-47891. Amount due 47-322-118. The number had grown from the original 38,000 through the mathematics of medical billing, interest compounding on debt that existed because his daughter's heart hadn't formed correctly in the womb, and fixing it cost more than most people earned in a year. The subsequent monitoring, the medications that kept her stable, The quarterly appointments with specialists who charge consultation fees that could feed a family for a month. All of it documented in the letter, all of it overdue, all of it threatening to interfere with Lily's next scheduled checkup in 6 weeks. Marcus thought about what Victoria Ashford would see when she checked her account in the morning. Thought about her sitting in whatever expensive apartment, overlooked whatever expensive view watching the notification appear, and feeling vindicated in every assumption she'd made about him. Let her think what she wanted. He had 24 hours and a daughter who needed medications that cost more than his monthly income from the handyman jobs that barely kept them fed. He opened his laptop, the 7-year-old machine, taking its time to boot up. The battery had died 2 years ago, the power cord held together with electrical tape he'd stolen from a job site. The screen flickered twice before stabilizing, and Marcus navigated to the Boston Children's Hospital patient portal with fingers that suddenly wouldn't stop shaking. The payment screen loaded slowly, each field a reminder of everything he owed and couldn't pay. Account number, amount due, payment method. His cursor hovered over the credit card number field for a full minute while he talked himself through the decision again. This wasn't his money. It was her money, her joke, her social experiment designed to prove people like him were irresponsible with opportunity. Using it for Lily's hospital bills felt justified because medical debt was systemic cruelty, because no child should go without care due to cost, because Sarah would have wanted him to do whatever it took to keep their daughter healthy. But it still felt like theft, like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Marcus entered the card number. Expiration date, security code, billing address. He left blank because he didn't know Victoria Ashford's address and didn't want to. The confirmation screen appeared. Are you sure you want to process this payment? He thought about Lily sleeping in the next room, her nightlight rabbit keeping watch. Thought about Sarah dying on an operating table 4 years ago while surgeons tried to repair the same heart defect in a second surgery that should have been routine. Thought about everything he'd lost and everything he still had to lose if he let pride dictate decisions about his daughter's health. Marcus clicked submit payment. The screen processed a loading circle spinning for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. Then payment successful. Thank you for your payment. Your account balance is now $0. For the first time in 4 years, Lily's medical care was paid in full. The next appointment wouldn't be refused. The collection calls would stop. They could breathe. Marcus put his head in his hands and let himself break down at the kitchen table silent, so he wouldn't wake Lily, shoulders shaking with something that might have been relief, or might have been grief, or might have been the specific exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting too long with too little. When he could breathe again, he looked at the remaining envelopes. 21 hours left, and rent was still 3 months overdue. Victoria woke to her phone buzzing at 7:15, the notification cutting through the champagne fog that made her head feel packed with cotton. She almost dismissed it without looking, assuming promotional email or calendar reminder, something that could wait until after coffee and the aspirin she kept in industrial quantities in her bathroom cabinet. But something made her tap the alert. Curiosity maybe, or the lingering awareness of the experiment she'd started the night before. Transaction alert, $47,322.18. Boston Children's Hospital. Victoria sat up so fast her vision swam. She read the notification again, certain she was misunderstanding something fundamental about the numbers on her screen. $47,000. To a children's hospital. Processed at 2:43 in the morning while she slept in her Riverside apartment, surrounded by friends who joked about casinos and luxury cars. Her fingers moved through the banking app on autopilot, pulling up transaction details. The payment cleared legitimate, traceable to an actual hospital billing department with an account number and patient reference. Not fraud, not a scam, an actual hospital bill for actual medical services, which meant the man from the gala had a sick child. Victoria's stomach dropped in a way she'd never experienced before, physical sensation accompanying realization. She'd handed her credit card to a desperate father as entertainment, had made him the subject of speculation and jokes, while his daughter, because Children's Hospital suggested daughter or son, a small person who needed expensive care, required tens of thousands of dollars in medical intervention. She checked for other transactions, needing to see what else he'd done, what other choices he'd made in the hours since walking out of the Marriott with her Platinum Amex. The list populated slowly, each entry another small earthquake in the foundation she'd built her worldview on. Bay Property Management, $4,650. Eversource Energy, $847.32. CVS Pharmacy, $186. Star Market, $287.45. Not a single luxury. Not one frivolous purchase or impulse decision. Just bills the kind that arrived in mailboxes and piled up when income couldn't stretch to cover them. Rent multiple months, overdue utilities, threatened with disconnection medications that cost more than some people's car payments. Victoria pulled up Google with hands she couldn't quite keep steady. She typed what costs $47,000 at Children's Hospital. The results made her chest tighten harder. Cardiac surgery, cancer treatment, chronic illness management, the kind of medical interventions that arrive when something was seriously permanently wrong with a child, when parents mortgaged everything they owned and it still wasn't enough. She thought about the man's face at the registration table, the careful blankness when the volunteer turned him away. Not embarrassment, resignation. The expression of someone who'd been denied entry to so many places that one more rejection barely registered. He had a sick child, hospital debt that would follow him for decades, and she'd given him her credit card like it was a party trick, then gone home to laugh about it, the friends who'd speculated on what trashy purchase he'd make first. Victoria set her phone down and stared at her bedroom ceiling, at the crown molding that had been installed when the building was new in 1890 and maintained by people whose annual salaries were probably less than her monthly trust fund distribution. For the first time since Brendan Crawford had called her Ice Victoria, Ashford felt something real crack open in her chest. It felt like shame. More transactions appeared throughout the morning as Victoria sat at her kitchen island, pretending to drink coffee she couldn't taste. Each notification arrived like accusation grocery store pharmacy, again a payment to what looked like a medical supply company. The man was methodically working through obligations, paying off debt that had accumulated while she'd been buying Vera Wang dresses and attending galas she couldn't even remember the purpose of. Her phone rang at 3:47. The caller ID showed her bank's fraud department, and Victoria answered, already knowing what they'd ask. Miss Ashford, this is Daniel Foster from Account Security. We're seeing the unusual activity on your Platinum card and wanted to verify these are authorized transactions. They're authorized, a pause diplomatic. I understand, but the pattern is quite atypical for your spending history. Large payments to a hospital, a property management company in Dorchester, various utilities. It appears someone may be using your card for bill payments rather than traditional purchases. Are you certain this isn't fraudulent activity? Victoria almost laughed. The bank was confused because the transactions didn't match their algorithms for either legitimate spending or typical fraud. The man wasn't behaving like a thief or a consumer. He was behaving like someone desperately trying to keep his family alive, and the financial system couldn't categorize that. I gave the card to someone. It's voluntary, a complicated situation. Another pause longer this time. You gave your Platinum card to someone else to use 24 hours as a sort of experiment. Daniel Foster's professional composure cracked slightly disapproval leaking through. I see. Well, the transactions are authorized then, but I should mention the spending has exceeded your typical monthly amount by a significant margin. Would you like me to place a limit or flag further purchases known? Victoria watched another notification appear. Even as they spoke Star Market, again smaller amount this time, let it continue. After disconnecting, she found herself dialing a different number one she'd obtained through means she didn't want to examine too closely. Connections favors the kind of access money bought when you knew which hands to grease. Hospital billing departments kept records. Records contained contact information. It had taken 3 calls and some creative explanations, but she had what she needed. The private investigator answered on the second ring. Trevor Nash, his voice carrying the professional neutrality of someone paid to ask no questions. Miss Ashford, what can I do for you? I need information on someone. A man, approximately 37, tall, manual labor background. He was at the Hearts for Children Gala last night at the Marriott Copley, left early. His daughter is a patient at Boston Children's Hospital. Trevor's keyboard clicked in the background. That's not much to work with. Cross-reference with the hospital's billing. Recent payment, $47,000. Patient account number, BCH 2021-47891. The clicking stopped. Miss Ashford accessing hospital records without authorization is legally questionable. It'll cost extra. Victoria looked out her penthouse windows at the river below, at the city she'd lived in her whole life without really seeing. Do it, whatever it costs. 2 hours later, Trevor delivered. The report came via encrypted email, professional and thorough and utterly damning. Marcus Brennan, age 37, date of birth, March 12, 1988. Current address, 347 Dorchester Avenue, Unit 3F. Daughter Lily Brennan, age 8, cardiac patient at Boston Children's Hospital. Wife Sarah Brennan, deceased 2021. Last known employment, Ashford Development, 2017-2021. Victoria read the last line 3 times each reading, driving the information deeper like a stake. Ashford Development, her father's company. Marcus Brennan had worked for her. Father had been employed at the family business until 4 years ago, right around the time his wife died. 4 years ago, 2021. The same year Sarah Brennan's death was recorded. Victoria's hands started shaking as she reached for her phone, pulling up her father's contact. The call connected after 2 rings, Graham Ashford's voice carrying the distracted tone of someone interrupted during something important. Dad, I need to ask you something. What is it, sweetheart? Papers rustled in the background. Probably contracts or reports from the development projects that had built the family fortune. Do you remember a Marcus Brennan worked for you 2017 to 2021? Silence stretched long enough that Victoria knew he'd heard the question and was deciding how to answer. Name sounds familiar. Why I need to know what happened? Why did he leave Vic? I don't remember every employee. We have 200 people on payroll at any given time. Try, it's important. Graham sighed, the sound carrying both irritation and something else Victoria couldn't identify. There was a site incident, crane accident, someone got hurt. We had to let people go for liability reasons. Marcus was hurt saving someone, wasn't he? I don't remember details. It was 4 years ago. The timeline snapped into sharp relief. Sarah Brennan died in 2021. Marcus got fired in 2021. The connection couldn't be coincidence. Dad, tell me the truth. He violated safety protocols entering an active crane zone. We had no choice but to terminate his employment. It was a liability issue. The company had to protect itself. Victoria knew when her father was lying. His voice rose slightly. Words came faster, emphasis landed in wrong places. Graham Ashford was lying about Marcus Brennan, and the lie meant something terrible had happened that Victoria's family had been part of. She ended the call without goodbye, something she'd never done before in 30 years of being Graham Ashford's dutiful daughter. The phone felt heavy in her hand, weighted with information she couldn't unknow. Marcus Brennan had worked for her father's company, had been fired 4 years ago for reasons Graham was lying about, had lost his wife the same year, had been left with a daughter who needed expensive cardiac care and medical debt that would have destroyed anyone's credit. And Victoria had handed him her credit card as a joke, had turned him into entertainment for friends who'd speculated about casinos and designer sneakers, while he'd used every dollar to keep his family alive. The shame in her chest cracked wider, letting in something that felt dangerously close to actual emotion. Victoria drove to Dorchester at 5 in the evening, the Mercedes feeling obscene on streets where cars were functional rather than fashionable. The address Trevor provided led her to a neighborhood she'd never spent time in, blocks of 3-story buildings that had probably been modest middle-class housing 60 years ago and had declined steadily since. She parked a block from 347 Dorchester Avenue, suddenly uncertain what she was doing here or what she'd hoped to accomplish. Observing felt invasive, approaching felt impossible, but sitting in her penthouse waiting for more transaction notifications had become unbearable. The building stood between a corner bodega with security bars on the windows and a laundromat that looked unchanged since the 80s. The front steps needed repair, concrete cracked and uneven. A handwritten sign on the door announced the elevator was out of service, though Victoria suspected it had been out of service for considerably longer than the temporary sign suggested. She watched the entrance from her car, feeling like exactly what she was, a wealthy woman slumming in a neighborhood she had no business being in, watching people whose lives she'd never understand. Children played on a small, concrete area that served as a playground, their shouts carrying through the cooling evening air. A woman pushed a stroller past, nodding to someone Victoria couldn't see. Life happened here, ordinary and ongoing, completely separate from the world Victoria inhabited. Then they emerged. Marcus Brennan and his daughter, hand in hand, the girl small for 8 years old, and moving with the kind of careful deliberation that suggested her body had taught her to be cautious. Marcus leaned down to hear something she said, his complete attention focused on her words. Victoria's chest constricted watching them. The girl's dark hair caught the streetlight as they paused at the corner bodega. She pointed at something in the window display, something Victoria couldn't see from this distance. Marcus knelt to her level, speaking quietly, and the girl nodded with the kind of acceptance that made Victoria's eyes burn. They continued walking without entering the store. Whatever the girl had wanted, Marcus had explained why they couldn't have it, and she'd accepted without argument. The transaction was so ordinary and so heartbreaking that Victoria had to look away. They ended up at the small playground where other children were already playing. Lily, because this had to be Lily, the 8-year-old with the cardiac condition that had cost $47,000, approached a girl around her age with shy enthusiasm. The other girl's face lit up. "Lily, you're here, hi Mia. My daddy paid the hospital." Lily's voice carried clear and proud, advertising the payment Victoria had enabled through her credit card experiment. Marcus pushed Lily gently on the swing set, careful not to let her go too high. A woman Victoria assumed was Mia's mother approached him with warm familiarity. "That's wonderful, Marcus. We've been praying for you." "Thank you, Rachel. It means a lot." His voice carried genuine gratitude, the kind that came from accepting help without shame. "You still coming to the food pantry Wednesday?" "Yeah, if you're still offering rides, always." Victoria sat in her Mercedes watching this exchange and felt the final pieces of her worldview collapse. Marcus Brennan went to food pantries, relied on neighbors for transportation, raised his daughter in a building with a broken elevator and cracked front steps. And he'd used her credit card not for luxuries or entertainment, but for medical bills and rent and groceries. He'd proven exactly the opposite of what she'd expected to prove. The wealthy woman in the expensive car watching a desperate father and his sick child play on a public playground. Victoria saw herself clearly for perhaps the first time in her life, and the image was devastating. She started the Mercedes and drove back to Beacon Hill in absolute silence, not trusting herself to turn on music or radio or anything that might drown out the thoughts screaming in her head. The leather seats felt too soft. The climate control felt too precise. Everything about her life felt like obscenity next to what she'd just witnessed. Victoria parked in her building's garage and took the elevator to her penthouse, each floor ascending, feeling like descent into something she couldn't name. She let herself into 1,200 square feet of carefully curated emptiness, all the furniture and art and expensive finishes suddenly looking like exactly what they were, attempts to fill space that didn't want filling. Her phone showed 2 more notifications. Star Market again. CVS again. Marcus Brennan working through the 24 hours she'd given him with the same methodical care he probably applied to everything in his life. Victoria sat on her $12,000 sectional and felt for the first time since Brendan Crawford had called her ice, something that might have been tears trying to happen. They didn't come. She still didn't know how to cry, still couldn't access whatever mechanism normal people use to process emotion through physical release. But the wanting to cry was new. The understanding that something inside her had broken in a way that needed breaking was new. The recognition that she'd been wrong about everything had built her entire understanding of human nature on foundations of privilege and contempt was so new it hurt. 24 hours to spend whatever you want. She'd meant it as proof of others' weakness. Instead, Marcus Brennan had proven her own, had shown her exactly what happened when resources met actual need instead of manufactured want. And somewhere across the city, in a 3-floor walk-up with a broken elevator, a man she'd turned into entertainment was putting his daughter to bed in the only real bedroom their apartment contained, probably wondering if the wealthy woman who'd given him her credit card would cancel it before he could finish paying the bills that kept them alive. Victoria looked at her phone one more time. 15 hours remained on the experiment. She didn't cancel the card, didn't set limits or restrictions, or do anything except watch the notifications arrive and feel the shame in her chest crack wider with each one. Ice melted when enough heat hit it. Victoria Ashford was learning this lesson 24 hours too late. The doorman called up at exactly 8 o'clock Sunday evening, his voice carrying the particular discomfort of someone delivering news his employer might not want to hear. "Miss Ashford, there's a Marcus Brennan here to see you." Victoria had spent the last hour preparing for this moment, without knowing what preparation actually meant. She'd changed clothes 3 times, settling on jeans and a cashmere sweater that cost what most people spent on winter wardrobes, but at least didn't scream wealth quite as loudly as the Vera Wang. She'd poured wine she couldn't drink, opened her laptop to emails she couldn't read, paced between rooms in her penthouse until the river view from every window felt like accusation. Send him up. The elevator would take 45 seconds. Victoria counted them, each one stretching longer than physics allowed. When the knock finally came, she opened the door to find Marcus Brennan standing in her hallway like he'd materialized from a different dimension entirely. He stopped at her threshold, refusing to step onto the imported rug that probably cost more than his monthly rent, even before he'd paid the back amount with her credit card. His boots carried street dirt she would have paid someone to clean without thinking about it. His jacket was the same one from the gala zipper still broken. You can come in. I'm fine here. Just returning this. He extended her platinum Amex alongside a manila folder thick with papers. Everything's documented, every transaction, every receipt. You can see exactly where it went. Victoria took the folder but didn't open it, too focused on Marcus's face. He looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than missed sleep, the kind of tired that accumulated over years rather than hours. She'd seen his expression at the gala and misread it completely. What she'd taken for resignation was actually conservation, the careful management of energy by someone who'd learned he couldn't afford to waste any. How much is left on what I spent? It's in the folder. Total comes to $53,292.95. Everything itemized, everything accounted for. I meant you didn't spend anything on yourself. I spent it on my family. Same thing. Victoria heard the distinction he was making, the refusal to pretend he'd indulged in anything unnecessary. I meant you didn't buy anything just because you wanted it. No luxuries, no treats, nothing frivolous. Something that might have been laughter crossed Marcus's face, bitter and brief. When was the last time you worried whether your kid would have a place to sleep next month? When was the last time you chose between medication and groceries? The questions landed like punches because Victoria had no good answers. Never and never, which was exactly his point. Frivolous isn't something I have room for. He turned toward the elevator, conversation apparently finished. Wait. Victoria's voice stopped him halfway across the threshold. She hadn't planned what to say next, hadn't scripted this confrontation, and words came out raw and unfiltered in ways she'd spent 30 years learning to avoid. I know you worked for my father. Marcus went very still, tension visible in his shoulders. You investigated me. I needed to understand. Understand why the poor man didn't buy a TV, why he didn't prove you right about people like him, wasting money on stupid things. His voice carried exhaustion rather than anger, like they were having a conversation he'd conducted too many times to find energy for fresh outrage. I was wrong about all of it. Yeah, you were. He met her eyes directly, no flinching or deflection. You wanted to prove something about people like me. I wanted to prove something too. What that money isn't a measure of worth, that how someone spends matters more than how much they have. That being poor doesn't mean being foolish or greedy or less than human. He paused, each word deliberate. I think I proved my point better than you proved yours. Marcus left without waiting for response. Victoria stood in her doorway, listening to his footsteps recede the elevator doors, closing with mechanical finality. When she finally looked at the folder he'd left behind, her hands were shaking. The folder sat unopened on her coffee table for 3 days. Victoria circled it like dangerous object approaching and retreating, finding reasons to be in different rooms where she wouldn't have to acknowledge its presence. Kate called twice, asking about the experiment's outcome. Victoria let both calls go to voicemail. Thursday morning, she finally opened it, the contents spilling across imported marble in damning detail. Boston Children's Hospital payment confirmation showing Lily Brennan's account brought to zero balance. Bay Property Management receipt documenting rent arrears, cleared eviction notice withdrawn. Eversource Energy restoration. Notice service continuing. CVS Pharmacy medication refill approvals for cardiac prescriptions Victoria couldn't pronounce. Star Market grocery receipts listing eggs, bread, milk, vegetables, chicken breast, nothing pre-prepared, nothing convenient, just raw ingredients for someone who cooked from necessity rather than hobby. At the bottom, printed on regular copy paper from a machine that left streaks, was a photograph. The girl from the playground, dark hair and careful smile posture, suggesting she'd learned to hold herself with caution. On the back in handwriting that showed the particular care of someone writing something important. Her name is Lily. She's 8. Her mother died during her second heart surgery. Thank you for helping keep her father out of medical debt long enough to watch her grow up. Victoria read the note until the words blurred. Lily's mother had died during heart surgery. The same surgery meant to save Lily's life had killed Sarah Brennan, and Marcus had spent 4 years living with that arithmetic. Wife lost trying to save daughter, then job lost trying to save co-worker, then 4 years drowning in debt from both losses. And Victoria had turned him into entertainment, had laughed with friends about what frivolous purchase the poor man would make first, had set up the entire experiment to confirm biases that felt obscene now in daylight. She called Kate at 2 in the morning when the shame finally overwhelmed whatever pride had been keeping her silent. Kate answered with sleep-rough confusion. Vic, you okay? No, I'm not okay. The admission came easier than expected, like confessing to something she'd known for a while but hadn't wanted to name. What happened? The man from the gala, Marcus. He has a daughter who's sick, had a wife who died 4 years ago. He was fired from Dad's company the same year. And I gave him my credit card like it was a joke. She heard her voice crack unfamiliar territory. Kate, I made him entertainment for us. We laughed about what stupid thing he'd buy. What did he buy? Hospital bills, rent to avoid eviction, utilities to keep electricity on, medicine for his daughter, groceries, nothing else. Not one single thing for himself. Silence stretched while Kate processed. That's not what we expected. Victoria laughed, the sound harsh even to her own ears. No, it's not. He used every dollar to survive, and I was supposed to feel superior when he spent it on something I could mock. What are you going to do? I don't know. Victoria looked at Lily's photo still sitting on her coffee table, the handwritten note visible beneath. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you can't fix it. Maybe you just have to do better going forward. The suggestion hung between them, simple and impossible. Victoria had spent 30 years doing exactly what her social class expected, maintaining appearances and keeping emotions at arm's length and never questioning the assumptions that made her life comfortable. Doing better meant dismantling foundations she'd built her entire identity on. After they disconnected, Victoria sat in her penthouse darkness and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done. The ice Brendan Crawford had accused her of hiding behind was melting, and underneath was something raw and painful and possibly necessary. Growth hurt. Change hurt. Becoming a better version of yourself required acknowledging how terrible the current version was. She fell asleep on the couch with Lily's photo clutched in her hand, dreamless and heavy. Victoria called Trevor Nash Friday morning, the private investigator answering with the professional cheer of someone expecting repeat business. Miss Ashford, what can I do for you this time? I need everything about the Ashford Development Site accident, November 2021. OSHA reports internal communications witness statements. Everything that exists. Trevor's keyboard clicking paused. That's your father's company. I know, you're sure you want this? Could get uncomfortable, I'm sure. Victoria looked at Lily's photo propped against her laptop. Whatever it costs, whatever you have to do, find out what really happened. The report arrived 48 hours later in an encrypted email containing documents Victoria wished she could unread. OSHA Incident Report Number 2021, MA 4789, detailing crane load failure, resulting in 1 employee injury, 1 employee narrowly avoiding serious harm. Crane operator identified as Jake Morrison, nephew of Ashford Development, VP Robert Morrison. Cable securing mechanism found improperly fastened, safety protocols violated at operator level. But the internal emails were worse. Graham Ashford to HR Director Margaret Wells. Find a way to protect Jake, he's family, and Robert's been with the company 15 years. We can't let this derail his career. Wells to Graham. We can attribute fault to Brennan. He entered the active crane zone without authorization. Technically a violation, even though he was preventing injury to the new hire. Graham, do it. Offer settlement if Brennan pushes back. $15,000 should be enough to make this go away quietly. HR file notation showed Marcus had refused the settlement. Offer had insisted he'd done nothing wrong, saving Ethan Walsh from being crushed. Ashford Development's response was documented in emails that made Victoria's stomach turn. Spread the word that Brennan is difficult, confrontational, a liability risk. Make sure other contractors know we had to let him go for safety violations. The blacklisting had been systematic and intentional. Marcus Brennan had saved someone's life and been destroyed for it. His employment prospects poisoned throughout the industry by a company that chose protecting executive family over protecting the truth. Victoria's father had orchestrated the entire thing. She drove to Ashford Tower without calling ahead, without giving Graham warning or time to prepare explanations. The elevator to the executive floor felt like ascending toward confrontation she'd spent 30 years avoiding, but retreat wasn't available anymore. Not after reading those emails. Not after understanding what her family had done. Graham's assistant tried to intercept her. "He's in a meeting," Victoria walked past without slowing. She'd grown up in this building, knew every hallway and office, and nobody stopped the boss's daughter when she moved with purpose. Graham looked up from his desk, surprise giving way to pleasure. "Vic, what brings you here?" She dropped Trevor's folder in the middle of his contract drafts. "Marcus Brennan." Graham's expression hardened immediately, warmth vanishing like someone had flipped a switch. "Where did you get this?" "You lied to me. About the accident, about why he was fired, about everything." "Those are internal company documents. They're confidential. He saved someone's life, and you destroyed his career." Victoria heard her voice rising, control slipping, and didn't care. "You protected Jake Morrison because he's Robert's nephew. You blamed Marcus to cover up nepotism. I protected the company." Graham stood authority radiating from 6 feet of height and 30 years of executive presence. "One employee isn't worth litigation and regulatory scrutiny that could damage everything I've built. One employee whose wife had just died, who had a daughter who was 4 years old and sick. You knew his situation. I knew he had family." "Most people do." Graham's voice carried dismissal, the conversation boring him. "That doesn't change business decisions. We had liability to manage." Liability. Victoria repeated the word like she'd never heard it before. "His wife died during their daughter's surgery. 3 weeks later, he came back to work because he needed insurance for her medications. And you fired him for saving someone. He violated protocol entering an active crane zone. The crane operator was drunk. Jake Morrison was drunk on the job, and you covered it up." Graham's jaw tightened, the only indication she'd struck nerve. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Victoria pulled out the OSHA report, the sections highlighting Jake's failures. "I know you blamed Marcus to protect your VP's nephew. I know you blacklisted him to make sure he couldn't find other work. And I know you've been lying about it ever since." "Victoria," Graham's voice dropped to dangerous quiet, "you need to be very careful about accusations. This is my company, my reputation, my legacy you're attacking. Your legacy is built on crushing people like Marcus Brennan. People who did everything right and got punished for it because protecting them was inconvenient." One employee, Graham's composure finally cracked, volume rising. "Against 200 others who depend on this company staying profitable and avoiding lawsuits. I made a business decision. You made a choice." Victoria felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of her father, the man who taught her to ride bikes and attend galas and never questioned where money came from. "You chose Jake Morrison over Marcus Brennan. You chose your VP's comfort over doing what's right. You chose wrong. Get out of my office. I'm going." Victoria gathered Trevor's folder documents that proved everything she'd accused. "But Dad, I gave Marcus Brennan my credit card 2 weeks ago. He used it for hospital bills and rent and groceries. Nothing else. He's a better person than either of us will ever be." She walked out before Graham could respond, elevator descent, feeling like falling towards something rather than away from it. Her phone buzzed before she reached the ground floor. Text from her father, 6 words, "You're making a terrible mistake." Victoria deleted it without responding. The only mistake was taking 30 years to see her father clearly. Kate called the next morning with news delivered in the careful tone of someone unsure how their information would be received. "Vic, I ran into Rachel Murphy at the charity committee meeting yesterday. You know Lily's friend, Mia's mother?" Victoria's hand tightened on her coffee mug. "What did she say?" "Lily needs another surgery. Cardiac catheterization, possibly full surgical intervention. Costs around $35,000 out of pocket that Marcus doesn't have." The coffee turned to ash in Victoria's mouth. "When soon? Within 4 weeks, or the condition worsens?" Rachel said Marcus is working triple shifts, trying to save up, but there's no way he'll make it in time. Victoria set down her mug before she dropped it, hands shaking with something that felt like anger and fear combined. 4 weeks, $35,000. Marcus had just cleared his medical debt using her card, and now Lily needed more surgery that would bury him again. Thanks for telling me. What are you going to do? The question Victoria had been asking herself since finding Trevor's report, since confronting her father, since realizing the full scope of damage her family had caused. I don't know. He won't accept charity. This isn't charity. Kate's voice carried certainty Victoria envied. This is his daughter's life. He specifically told me he doesn't want my help, that I can't fix what's broken with money. Then fix it with something else. Victoria disconnected and stared at her laptop at the folder of Ashford development documents still sitting on her desk. Money couldn't repair what Graham had destroyed, but maybe justice could. She called Trevor again, third time in 2 weeks. He answered with knowing amusement. Miss Ashford, becoming a regular client. Can Marcus Brennan still sue Ashford Development for wrongful termination? After 4 years, Trevor's keyboard clicked. Massachusetts statute of limitations for employment cases is 3 years. He's past deadline. What about fraud? If the company knowingly concealed information or intimidated him into not pursuing legal action, fraud extends the statute. Trevor's tone shifted to professional interest. You have evidence of concealment. I have emails showing systematic cover-up and intentional blacklisting. Witness who can testify Jake Morrison was impaired on the job. Documentation that Marcus was offered settlement contingent on staying quiet. That's textbook fraud extension. He could absolutely sue. But Miss Ashford, this would mean suing your father's company. Publicly. It'll be in court records, potentially media coverage. Victoria thought about Marcus refusing her help about Lily needing surgery. Marcus couldn't afford about 4 years of debt and struggle caused by decisions her father made to protect someone else's nephew. I know. Find me the best labor attorney in Boston, someone who'll take this on contingency. Trevor was quiet for a moment. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. Within 6 hours, Victoria had contact information for Eleanor Whitfield, labor attorney, with a reputation for taking on powerful companies and winning. Their meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, neutral coffee shop in South End, where neither of them would be recognized. Eleanor arrived early, woman in her mid-40s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that cataloged everything. Miss Ashford, interesting case you're proposing. Victoria slid the folder across the table. Everything's documented. The accident, the cover-up, the blacklisting. Marcus Brennan was wrongfully terminated and systematically prevented from finding other work. Eleanor read through the documents with professional speed expression, never changing. This is solid, really solid, but there's a complication. What complication? Statute of limitations expired last year. Unless we can prove active fraud that prevented him from suing earlier. She tapped the emails. These help, but we'd need Brennan himself to testify about the settlement offer and how it was presented as his only option. We'd need him to be the plaintiff. That's the problem. Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee for warmth that wasn't coming. He doesn't want my help. Specifically told me not to try fixing this with money. This isn't about money. Eleanor's voice carried conviction from years of litigation. This is about justice, about holding a company accountable for destroying a man's livelihood to protect political relationships. That's what I do. He still has to agree to be plaintiff, and he won't talk to me. Then find someone who can talk to him. Eleanor closed the folder. But Miss Ashford, you understand that if we pursue this, your father's company faces significant liability. We're talking hundreds of thousands in damages, possibly more with punitive awards. Public exposure of the cover-up. Federal regulatory attention. This will damage your family. Victoria thought about Lily needing surgery, about Marcus working triple shifts at jobs that probably paid minimum wage, about 4 years of watching his daughter be careful with her body because proper medical care was too expensive to access. My family damaged him first. This is just evening the score. Victoria drove to Dorchester Thursday evening without calling ahead, knowing Marcus would refuse if she gave warning. The 3 flights of stairs in his building felt steeper than they should have, each step an opportunity to turn back that she didn't take. She knocked on Unit 3F and waited, hearing movement inside before the door opened. Marcus filled the doorway, surprise giving way to something harder. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. I'm busy. A child's voice carried from inside the apartment. Daddy, who is it? Someone from work, sweetheart. I'll be right there. Marcus stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. Say what you need to say. I know about Lily's surgery. Victoria watched his jaw tighten. The cardiac catheterization. 35,000 you don't have with 4 weeks to come up with it. How do you know about that? It doesn't matter. I want to help. I already told you I don't need your help. Not charity. Victoria pulled out Eleanor's business card. Justice, you were wrongfully terminated from Ashford Development. The statute of limitations can be extended because my father committed fraud trying to cover it up. You can sue and you'll win. Marcus looked at the card without taking it. My case is 4 years old. Fraud extends the deadline. My father covered up Jake Morrison's negligence, offered you settlement to stay quiet, blacklisted you throughout the industry, all documented in emails I have copies of. He paused. You'd work with Eleanor Whitfield on contingency. She only gets paid if you win. And Marcus, you will win. How long would a lawsuit take? Usually 6 to 12 months. But Eleanor can petition for expedited discovery given Lily's medical situation. Maybe 4 months for settlement. Marcus's expression didn't change. Lily's surgery is in 4 weeks. I know. That's why Victoria caught herself before offering money, remembering his earlier rejection. That's why this matters. The settlement would cover her surgery and everything else. Set you up financially so you never have to choose between rent and medication again. If I lose, you won't. The evidence is overwhelming. Victoria met his eyes. But even if you did, you'd only be out time. No upfront costs, no financial risk. Why are you doing this? Marcus's voice carried suspicion earned through 4 years of being kicked by systems supposed to help him. Because my father was wrong. What happened to you was wrong. And I have the power to help make it right. She paused. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let Eleanor review the case independently. Talk to her. Hear what she has to say. Then decide. This would mean suing your father's company. Publicly. You're okay with that? Victoria thought about Graham's voice on the phone, dismissive of Marcus's losses because they were inconvenient to acknowledge. Thought about Jake Morrison getting protected while Marcus got destroyed. Thought about Lily being careful on playground equipment because her heart had holes in it that expensive surgery could fix if only her father could afford it. I'm more than okay with it. I'm insisting on it. What Ashford Development did to you was illegal and immoral. They should be held accountable. Marcus studied her face for long enough that Victoria felt exposed to every assumption she'd ever made about poverty and character being examined and judged. Finally, what if I said I don't want justice? What if I just want to be left alone to handle this myself? Then I'd ask if you're making that choice because it's really what you want, or because pride is easier than accepting help. Victoria heard her own voice soften, losing the business edge. I know what my father did to you gives you every reason not to trust anyone named Ashford. But Lily shouldn't suffer because Graham made terrible choices 4 years ago. Lily isn't your responsibility. No. But fixing what my family broke is. Victoria extended Eleanor's card again. Please, just talk to her. That's all I'm asking. Marcus took the card, this time turning it over in his hands like testing weight. I need to think about it. You have 3 weeks before Lily's surgery gets critical. The offer isn't going away. She left before he could refuse definitively, footsteps echoing in the stairwell as she descended toward her Mercedes parked like beacon of wealth on a street where wealth meant having rent paid through the month. The drive back to Beacon Hill felt longer than geography justified, every mile stretching with uncertainty about whether Marcus would actually call Eleanor or if pride would stand between Lily and the care she needed. Victoria's phone rang as she pulled into her building's garage. Eleanor Whitfield, voice carrying satisfaction. He called. Marcus Brennan just called me, and he wants to meet tomorrow. Review the evidence independently, hear the case breakdown. Eleanor paused. Miss Ashford, I think he's going to do this. Relief hit harder than Victoria expected, physical sensation in her chest, like something unlocking. Thank you for taking this seriously. This is the kind of case I became a lawyer for. Powerful company crushing working people to protect executives. I'd do this pro bono if money weren't an object. Eleanor's voice hardened with professional anger. What your father's company did to Marcus Brennan is exactly the abuse employment law exists to prevent. Keep me updated every step. Eleanor disconnected, leaving Victoria sitting in her car in the parking garage beneath her building, hands still shaking with the realization that something was actually happening. Marcus was considering the lawsuit. Justice might actually arrive for someone who deserved it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Victoria stared at the message for a full minute before accepting that it was real. From Marcus, thank you for the attorney contact. We'll let you know what I decide. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on simple acknowledgement. Good luck with the meeting. The reply came immediately. This doesn't mean I trust you. Victoria smiled despite everything. I know. You shouldn't. But maybe someday you won't have to. No response came, but Victoria hadn't expected one. Trust was earned slowly by people who'd been betrayed systematically. All she could do was prove through actions what words couldn't establish. That she meant what she said about making things right. That some Ashfords were capable of choosing justice over family loyalty when those things came into conflict. She rode the elevator to her penthouse, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Emotional labor was real labor, she was discovering. Dismantling the assumptions that had structured her entire worldview required constant effort, constant vigilance against defaulting to comfortable prejudices. The penthouse felt emptier than usual. All the expensive furniture suddenly looking like what it was. Compensation for absence of actual human connection. Victoria changed into sweats worth more than most people's weekly groceries and curled up on her sectional with Lily's photo still sitting on the coffee table. Her name is Lily. She's 8. Her mother died during her second heart surgery. Victoria read the note again, the handwriting showing how carefully Marcus had formed each letter. He'd wanted her to understand that Lily was an abstract charity case or social experiment. She was a real child who'd lost her mother and might lose her health if her father couldn't afford the care she needed. And maybe if Eleanor was as good as her reputation suggested, if the evidence was as solid as it appeared, if Marcus actually went through with the lawsuit, instead of letting pride override practicality, maybe Lily would get the surgery she needed on a timeline that didn't depend on her father working himself to death. Maybe justice was possible, even when it meant destroying the relationship between Victoria and her father permanently, even when it meant choosing strangers over family, even when it meant admitting that everything she'd believed about poverty and character had been not just wrong, but actively harmful. Victoria fell asleep on the couch again. Lily's photo, the last thing she saw before exhaustion pulled her under. In her dreams, she was 8 years old herself, playing on playground equipment with a father who taught her that money measured worth and poverty indicated failure. The dream father had Graham's face, and dream Victoria believed everything he said because believing was easier than questioning. She woke at 3 in the morning with tears on her face, the first she'd cried since childhood. The ice was definitely melting. Eleanor called Monday afternoon with updates delivered in the clipped efficiency of someone who'd already made decisions. Marcus signed retainer agreement. We're filing Wednesday. Wrongful termination, fraud retaliation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Damages at $500,000 plus punitive. Victoria's hand tightened on her phone. $500,000 conservative estimate. Eleanor's voice carried satisfaction. He lost 4 years of income, sustained credit damage, psychological harm, and was prevented from working in his field through systematic blacklisting. That's worth significant money under Massachusetts law. We're also requesting expedited discovery given Lily's medical timeline. How did Marcus react to the amounts? Didn't care about money? Eleanor's tone suggested this surprised her. Only asked if we could win fast enough to help Lily. I told him settlements usually happen within 4 to 6 months, but we'd push for faster resolution. And if Ashford Development refuses to settle, then we go to trial and they lose bigger. Victoria, I've been doing this 20 years. Your father's company doesn't have a defense. The emails alone are devastating. Witness testimony will bury them. When does it become public record? Wednesday, when we file. Eleanor paused. Your father will know by Thursday morning. Media might pick it up depending on slow news day. You prepared for that? Victoria thought about Graham's face when she confronted him, the cold dismissal of Marcus's situation as a relevant business concern. Thought about 30 years of being Graham Ashford's daughter, of trusting his judgment, and assuming his decisions came from wisdom rather than expedience. I'm prepared. Do what needs to be done. The complaint was filed Wednesday at 9 in the morning, hitting Suffolk County Superior Court's electronic system with all the subtlety of bomb detonation. Eleanor sent Victoria a copy by noon, 40 pages of legal precision, outlining every failure, every lie, every calculated decision Ashford Development had made to destroy Marcus Brennan's career while protecting Jake Morrison's. The Boston Globe picked it up by Thursday morning. Construction worker sues Ashford Development over alleged hero firing, ran above the fold complete with photo of Marcus that looked like it came from LinkedIn before his account went dormant. The article outlined the basic facts: crane accident, employee saving coworker, wrongful termination, 4 years of unemployment in medical debt. Social media caught fire by afternoon. Hashtag Ashford Development trended on Twitter with comments ranging from outrage to skepticism to support. Someone found Marcus's address and started a GoFundMe that Victoria reported immediately because the last thing he needed was internet strangers turning his daughter's surgery into crowdfunding spectacle. Graham called at 3 voice-carrying fury Victoria had rarely heard directed at her. What the hell have you done? Help someone you hurt get justice. You helped him destroy this company. Do you understand what happens when this kind of accusation goes public? Government contracts were bidding on financing arrangements, partnerships, all of it jeopardized because you decided to play white knight for some ex-employee who can't accept responsibility for his own termination. Victoria kept her voice level through effort. He was terminated for saving someone's life. You terminated him to protect Jake Morrison. The emails prove it. Those emails are internal company communications. How did you even get them? I hired a private investigator. Not illegal when the information proves fraud. Graham's breathing came harsh through the phone line. If you continue with this, you're cut off. Trust fund company inheritance, everything. I will not support a daughter who actively works against family interests. The threat should have terrified her. 30 years of financial security gone with a signature. But Victoria discovered something interesting about fear. It lost power when you'd already decided the price was worth paying. Do what you need to do, Dad. I'm doing what I need to do. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is taking 30 years to see what kind of man you actually are. She disconnected before he could respond, hands steady despite knowing she'd just burned the bridge back to the only life she'd ever known. Kate called within the hour. Your father just cut you off. Trust fund everything. Are you okay? Victoria looked around her penthouse at the $12,000 monthly rent she could afford for maybe 3 more months before savings ran dry, at the furniture and art and expensive emptiness that had defined her existence. Yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. What are you going to do? Get a job. Victoria heard herself laugh, the sound surprising. I've never worked a day in my life. Time to start, doing what I don't know yet. Something that matters. Something that helps people instead of just taking up space. She paused. Kate, I spent 30 years being useless. I'd like to try being useful for a change. After they disconnected, Victoria pulled up job search websites with the growing awareness that her resume consisted of education she'd coasted through and social connections she'd inherited. No work history, no practical skills, nothing that would convince anyone to hire her for anything meaningful. But she had knowledge of how nonprofit boards functioned, had attended enough charity galas to understand fundraising mechanisms. Housing advocacy organizations existed throughout Boston, groups fighting the exact kind of displacement Marcus had nearly experienced. Maybe they needed someone who understood how wealthy donors thought, who could translate need into language that opened checkbooks. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere to start being the person she wanted to become instead of the person she'd accidentally been for 30 years. Victoria started drafting applications, each one a small step away from Victoria Ashford, the trust fund recipient, towards someone who might eventually deserve Marcus Brennan's respect. The work was humbling and necessary and felt more real than anything she'd done in 3 decades of expensive emptiness. Outside her windows, Boston moved through evening rush hour. Millions of people heading home from jobs that mattered and didn't matter, supporting families and paying bills and making choices about medication versus groceries that Victoria was only beginning to understand. Somewhere in Dorchester, Marcus Brennan was probably putting Lily to bed, reading her stories about characters who faced challenges bigger than themselves and found courage to keep fighting. And maybe if Eleanor was as good as her reputation suggested, maybe Marcus would win the settlement that let him stop fighting quite so hard. Maybe justice was possible after all. Not because the system worked, the system had failed Marcus completely, but because sometimes people with power chose to use it correctly even when correction meant sacrificing everything comfortable about their lives. Victoria fell asleep at her laptop job applications half finished, dreams full of playgrounds and children who moved carefully because their bodies had taught them caution. When she woke at dawn, her neck hurt from the awkward position, and her first thought was that she needed coffee. Her second thought was that Marcus Brennan had survived 4 years of this uncertainty, and she could survive however long it took to become someone worthy of the second chance she'd been given to make things right. The ice was completely melted now. What remained was harder, sharper, more painful, but infinitely more real. Victoria Ashford was learning what it felt like to be human instead of monument to accumulated wealth. The education was expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. She wouldn't have traded it for anything. Marcus sat at the corner of O'Brien's bar. Tuesday night, the retainer agreement Eleanor had sent, still unsigned on his phone finger, hovering over the digital signature line. The pub smelled like decades of spilled beer and fried food, comfortable in the way only neighborhood establishments could be. Patty Sullivan worked the taps with the efficiency of 20 years behind the same bar gray, threading through red hair that had once matched the Irish flag he kept mounted above the whiskey shelf. The older man slid a Guinness across polished wood without being asked. "You look like a man with a decision to make," something like that. Marcus stared at the foam, settling dark to light in gradual transition. He'd been staring at things a lot lately without actually seeing them as mine elsewhere, even when his body occupied space. This about the lawsuit. Patty leaned against the bar, giving Marcus his full attention, in the way that meant the conversation mattered. Kate mentioned something to Rachel about lawyers and Ashford Development. Word travels fast. Small community. We look out for each other. Patty pulled a rag from his back pocket, wiping down already clean surface in the perpetual motion of bartenders everywhere. "You gonna do it, I don't know." Marcus took a drink, the bitter familiar on his tongue. 4 years I've managed on my own. Asking for help now feels like admitting I can't handle my own life. You've been handling your life, Ahti. Patty's voice carried the particular certainty of someone who'd watched Marcus struggle and survive. Working 3 jobs, keeping Lily fed and housed and medicated. You've been handling more than most people could. But that doesn't mean you have to handle everything alone forever. This is different. This is Victoria Ashford giving me a way to sue her own father's company. Taking money that comes from destroying someone else, even if they deserve it. You saved Ethan Walsh's life and got fired for it. Patty's jaw tightened with old anger. Jake Morrison was drunk on the jaw and got protected because he's somebody's nephew. There's no moral ambiguity here, Marcus. You got screwed. Lawsuit doesn't make you weak or greedy, makes you someone finally holding powerful people accountable. Marcus rotated the glass between his palms, condensation cold against his skin. Lily's surgery is in 4 weeks. If I sue and it takes months to settle, she doesn't get help when she needs it. And if you don't sue, you work yourself to death trying to save $35,000 in a month, which isn't possible, and she doesn't get surgery at all. Patty met his eyes. "I know you, Marcus. Known you since you were 22 years old and just married Sarah. You're the best man I know. But you got one problem that's going to hurt that little girl if you don't fix it." "What problem?" "You're too stubborn to accept help, even when refusing it means people you love suffer." Patty pulled 2 shot glasses from beneath the bar, pouring Jameson into both. "Pride isn't a sin, Marcus, but letting it stand between your daughter and medical care she needs. That crosses a line. This isn't pride." Marcus heard defensiveness in his own voice and hated it. This is about not being someone's charity case, not being the poor man they parade around to feel good about themselves. Is Victoria Ashford parading you around, or is she trying to fix damage her father caused? Patty pushed 1 shot toward Marcus. From what Kate says, the woman got herself cut off from her trust fund over this. Lost her inheritance, her father's not speaking to her. That sound like someone using you for entertainment? The information hit harder than Marcus expected. Victoria had lost her money defending his right to sue, the same Victoria who'd handed him her credit card at a gala like it was party trick. None of it made sense with the assumptions he'd built about wealthy people and their motivations. Why would she do that? Maybe because watching you use her card for hospital bills instead of TV showed her something about herself she needed to see. Patty lifted his shot glass. Maybe because some people are capable of growth when confronted with how wrong they've been. Maybe because she's trying to become someone better than who she was. They drank in silence, whiskey burning down Marcus's throat. Across the bar, someone started a game of darts, the thunk of metal on cork, rhythmic and ordinary. This was his neighborhood, his people, the community that had kept him and Lily afloat when everything else tried to drown them. And they were all telling him the same thing: accept the help file, the lawsuit, let someone else carry weight for once. Sarah would want me to do this. Marcus spoke quietly, admission rather than question. Sarah would tell you to stop being a stubborn jackass and take care of your daughter. Patty's voice gentled. She'd tell you that knowing when to accept help isn't weakness. It's strength. A real man knows when he can't do everything alone, and he's brave enough to admit it. The words settled into Marcus's chest, finding home in the space where Sarah's voice used to live. She would have said exactly that, probably with more profanity, and definitely with the particular look that meant she loved him, but thought he was being an idiot about something important. One of the taps started leaking small drip that would waste gallons over days if left unattended. Marcus noticed it before Patty did, trained eye, catching the water beating on polished metal. Your number 3 is leaking, damn thing. Been acting up for weeks. Patty grabbed a wrench from beneath the bar, then paused. You know anything about fixing tap lines, might? Marcus came around the bar, examining the connection where liquid escaped. Looks like your washer's worn out and the compression fitting's loose. You got spare parts cabinet under the register. Marcus found replacement washers and a better wrench, the familiar work settling his mind in ways conversation couldn't. His hands knew this language, the specific tightness of properly sealed connections, the way water pressure tested every weak point. He shut off the line, replaced the washer, tightened the fitting with precise force that came from years of experience. The leak stopped. Water flowed clean when he tested it, no waste, no drip. There you go. $200 if you'd called a plumber. Patty clapped his shoulder. That's why I keep you around. Well, that and you're better company than most of my paying customers. Marcus cleaned his hands on the bar rag, muscle memory from 1,000 similar repairs. This was who he was, someone who fixed things, who made broken systems functional again. Maybe that's what the lawsuit was too, fixing a system that had broken him, making it functional for the next person who got crushed by powerful people protecting their own. I'm gonna do it. The decision arrived fully formed, no more uncertainty. I'm gonna sue Ashford Development, and I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna use the money to make sure Lily gets every surgery she needs for the rest of her life. About damn time. Patty poured another round. To justice. Better late than never. They drank to that, and Marcus pulled out his phone, opened Eleanor's email, and signed the retainer agreement with a finger that no longer hesitated. The digital signature processed confirmation appearing on screen. He was officially a plaintiff, now committed to confrontation with the company that had destroyed him. His phone buzzed immediately. Eleanor must have had alerts set up. Text appeared, received your signature. Filing tomorrow morning. Get ready. This is going to be public and possibly ugly. But we're going to win. Marcus typed back, I'm ready, then added, thank you for taking this on. Eleanor's response came fast. Thank you for having courage to hold them accountable. See you after filing. Marcus pocketed his phone and finished his Guinness, the ordinary sounds of the pub wrapping around him like comfort. Tomorrow the lawsuit would be public record. Tomorrow Graham Ashford would know his former employee was coming for him with evidence and legal representation and 4 years of righteous anger. Tomorrow everything changed. But tonight Marcus sat in his neighborhood bar with his oldest friend and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope that the system might actually work, that justice might actually arrive, that powerful people might actually face consequences for crushing those beneath them. It was a good feeling. Unfamiliar, fragile, but good. The settlement meeting happened 3 weeks later in a conference room Victoria had never seen before, neutral territory at Eleanor's law office in downtown Boston. The timing was deliberate, 1 week before Lily's scheduled surgery pressure point, designed to remind Ashford Development exactly what was at stake. Victoria arrived early, sitting in the reception area and watching Marcus enter with Eleanor 10 minutes later. He looked different somehow, not physically changed, but carrying himself with the particular posture of someone who'd decided to stop apologizing for existing. Their eyes met across the waiting room. He nodded once acknowledgement without warmth. She'd take it. Warmth required trust, and trust required time Marcus didn't owe her. Graham entered last with Gerald Blackwell, corporate counsel, who'd been cleaning up Ashford development messes for 20 years. Her father looked older than Victoria remembered, new lines around his mouth, gray more prominent in hair that had always been distinguished rather than aged. He saw her sitting there and his expression went carefully blank. The shut-down Victoria recognized from every confrontation in her childhood that had gotten too emotional for his comfort. The conference room held a table large enough for 8 windows overlooking the financial district, where towers of glass reflected each other in infinite regression. Eleanor took the head, positioning herself as the authority figure. Marcus and Victoria sat on one side, Graham and Gerald on the other, physical alignment making allegiances unmistakable. Gerald opened with the kind of dismissive professionalism that probably worked on people who weren't sure of their position. My client is prepared to offer $75,000 to settle this matter quietly and completely. Full release of all claims, confidential agreement, no admission of wrongdoing. Eleanor didn't even pretend to consider it. $150,000, given the fraud, retaliation, and systematic blacklisting documented in your own internal emails. Non-negotiable. My client won't go higher. Gerald's certainty wavered slightly when Eleanor slid 3 pages across the table, printouts of the most damning emails with relevant sections highlighted. Then we'll see you in court, where our exposure assessment suggests $300,000 to $500,000 plus punitive damages. Eleanor's voice carried the absolute confidence of someone holding better cards, plus federal regulatory attention to your OSHA violations and cover-up, plus media coverage of how you protected drunk employees while destroying heroes. Your call, counselor. Gerald pulled Graham aside for whispered consultation, intense enough that Victoria could see her father's jaw working. Marcus sat motionless beside her, watching the men who'd destroyed his life squirm under scrutiny they'd avoided for 4 years. Graham returned to the table, expression carved from granite. $125,000. Final offer. Marcus spoke for the first time, voice level and cold. You don't remember me, do you? Graham actually looked at him, then really looked, and Victoria watched her father search his memory for significance. Should I, November 2021, crane accident at the South End development site. I pushed Ethan Walsh out of the way when your nephew Jake's cable came loose because Jake was drunk operating heavy machinery. You fired me 3 weeks after my wife died during our daughter's heart surgery. You told people I was difficult and dangerous so nobody else would hire me. You destroyed 4 years of my life to protect someone else's nephew. Marcus leaned forward slightly. So no, you don't remember me, because I was never important enough for you to remember. The silence stretched until Graham broke it with defensive anger. That was a business decision. We had liability to manage. You had a choice. Marcus's voice never rose, which somehow made it cut deeper. Jake Morrison or me, your VP's comfort or doing what's right. You chose wrong. One employee against 200 others who depend on this company staying profitable. Graham's old arguments sounded hollow in this conference room, confronted with actual consequences. I made a business decision that protected the greater good. The greater good didn't include my daughter having medical care, didn't include me being able to work in my profession, didn't include anything except protecting powerful people from accountability. Marcus stood, Eleanor's hand on his arm, barely restraining him. Keep your $125,000. I'll see you in court. Wait. Gerald's composure finally cracked. What do you want? Marcus looked at Graham directly. $150,000. And a public apology. Admission that the termination was handled improperly and I acted appropriately in preventing injury. Gerald started to object. That's an admission of liability. I don't care about your liability. Marcus's voice carried 4 years of compressed rage finally finding release. I care that somewhere in your company records someone admits I did nothing wrong, that the next person this happens to has precedent showing they can fight back and win, that my daughter can read about this someday and know her father wasn't fired for being a screw-up, he was fired for doing the right thing. Graham's face had gone dangerously red. I will not issue a public apology. That's not happening. Then we're done here. Marcus turned toward the door. Victoria stood before she'd consciously decided to speak. If he won't apologize, I will. Everyone froze. Graham stared at his daughter like she'd materialized from another dimension. What, on behalf of Ashford Development, on behalf of my family, on behalf of myself? Victoria's voice came steady despite her hands shaking beneath the table. What happened to Marcus was wrong. The termination was unjust. His conduct was heroic, not irresponsible. And I will state all of this publicly with my name attached in any form he chooses. You don't have authority to speak for the company. Graham's words came through clenched teeth. I have authority to speak the truth, and I have a platform whether you like it or not. Victoria met Marcus's eyes. If my father won't do what's right, I will. Marcus studied her face, reading sincerity or manipulation or something between. Then to Graham, your daughter seems to have more integrity than you do. Interesting family dynamic. Graham stood abruptly, chair scraping. Victoria, we need to talk. Privately. No. Victoria remained seated. Anything you want to say, you can say in front of everyone here. I'm done with private conversations where you convince me protecting the family reputation matters more than protecting people. Her father's composure shattered completely, volume rising for the first time in Victoria's memory of him. You're destroying everything I built. This company, our name, our position in this city, all of it damaged because you decided to play hero for some ex-employee who can't accept responsibility for his own failures. Marcus Brennan saved someone's life. Victoria stood now, meeting her father's height. You punished him for it. That's not my failure or his. It's yours. And if admitting that destroys what you built, maybe what you built deserved destroying. The words hung in air-conditioned silence, changing something fundamental between father and daughter that couldn't be unchanged. Graham looked at her like she was a stranger, and Victoria looked back at a man she'd loved her whole life and suddenly couldn't respect. Gerald intervened with desperate professionalism. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. Let emotions settle before making final decisions. No recess. Eleanor's voice cut through. My client has a daughter who needs surgery in 6 days. We resolve this now or we're walking out that door and you're reading about this lawsuit in every publication that covers Boston business. Your choice takes 30 seconds. Graham sank back into his chair, defeat visible in the slope of his shoulders. 150,000. Statement on the company website acknowledging the termination was handled improperly. No admission of specific fault, no acceptance of liability, just acknowledgement of error in process. Take it or leave it. Marcus looked at Eleanor, who gave the smallest nod. It wasn't everything they'd wanted, but it was more than Graham had ever given anyone he'd wronged. Deal. But the statement goes up today, stays up permanently, and includes specific language that I acted appropriately in preventing injury. Fine. Graham wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Gerald will draft language for your attorney's approval. Eleanor produced settlement documents already prepared for multiple scenarios, the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Both sides signed, Gerald and Eleanor, notarizing the whole transaction completed in 15 minutes of tense silence. When it finished, Marcus stood and extended his hand to Graham. Thank you for finally doing the right thing, even if it took a lawsuit to make it happen. Graham didn't take the hand, just process the payment and get out of my life. Marcus lowered his hand without apparent offense. Already gone. He turned to Victoria, expression unreadable. Thank you for testifying, for standing up to him, for everything. I didn't do it for thanks. Victoria felt tears threatening and fought them back. I did it because it was right. Still, takes courage to choose strangers over family. Marcus's voice softened minimally. Not many people have that. He left with Eleanor, presumably to review final documents and process payment transfers. Graham and Gerald gathered their materials in furious silence, her father's movements sharp with controlled rage. Victoria waited until they reached the door. Dad. Graham paused but didn't turn around. I'm sorry it came to this, but I'm not sorry for what I did. He left without responding, Gerald trailing behind like apologetic shadow. The door closed with quiet finality. Conference room suddenly empty, except for Victoria and furniture that had witnessed the end of her relationship with her father. She sat down, legs no longer reliable, and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Justice had arrived. Marcus would get money for Lily's surgery. Graham had been forced to admit wrongdoing, even in limited capacity. Everything had worked out as well as could be expected. So why did it feel like she'd lost something irretrievable? Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. Eleanor says payment clears tomorrow. Lily's surgery is scheduled for Tuesday. Thank you again. Victoria typed. You're welcome. Good luck with everything. The response took several minutes. If you want to be there Tuesday, I wouldn't object. Not asking you to come, just saying you could if you wanted. The invitation felt like more trust than Victoria had earned, but she wasn't going to refuse it. I'll be there. Boston Children's Hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, the particular combination Victoria associated with the places where life and death negotiated terms. She arrived at 7 Tuesday morning, earlier than necessary, unable to stay away once she'd committed to being present. Marcus had texted the floor and waiting room minimal information delivered and without expectation of response. The surgical waiting area held maybe 30 people distributed across chairs, designed for uncomfortable endurance. Marcus sat in the corner, Maggie O'Donnell beside him, knitting something purple. Rachel Murphy occupied another chair with Mia reading a picture book. A small community gathered to support one of their own. Victoria hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain whether her presence would help or intrude. Marcus looked up, and their eyes met across the room. He gestured to an empty seat beside him. Permission, not enthusiasm, but permission nonetheless. She crossed to join him, nodding to Maggie and Rachel. They nodded back, curious, but not hostile. Lily's been in prep for 30 minutes. Marcus's voice carried steady control that probably cost significant effort. Surgery starts at 8, estimated 4 hours. Doctor said complications are possible but not expected. How are you holding up? I've been better. He managed something approximating a smile. But I've been worse too. At least this time I can afford the surgery. That's not nothing. Maggie patted his knee with the familiarity of long friendship. She's going to be fine, dear. Strong girl, strong heart. The waiting stretched with the particular torture of medical uncertainty. 8 o'clock came and went. 9 o'clock. Victoria bought terrible coffee from the cafeteria and brought back cups for everyone's small offering that Rachel accepted with surprised gratitude. They sat in mostly silence, broken occasionally by Mia's questions about Lily and Rachel's gentle explanations. At 11:30, a surgical nurse appeared in the doorway. Family of Lily Brennan Marcus stood so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. That's me. I'm her father. Dr. Patel would like to speak with you. The nurse's expression gave nothing away, professional neutrality that could mean anything. Please come with me. Victoria watched Marcus follow the nurse through double doors, his back rigid with fear, being contained through will alone. Maggie's knitting needles clicked faster. Rachel pulled Mia close. The waiting room held its collective breath. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned, and Victoria knew immediately something had gone wrong. His face showed too much emotion for good news control, cracking around edges. She's okay. His voice broke halfway through. Complications during the procedure. More scar tissue from the previous surgeries than they expected. Had to do additional repair work. But she's stable. She's going to be okay. Maggie burst into tears, knitting abandon. Rachel sagged with relief. Victoria found her own eyes burning throat tight with emotion she hadn't known she was capable of feeling for a child she'd never met. Can you see her? Rachel asked. Recovery room in about an hour. Doctor said she came through it well. Strong kid. Marcus sat down heavily, adrenaline crash visible in the slump of his shoulders. Strong kid. Victoria did something she'd never done before, reached over and took his hand, squeezing once before releasing. I'm so glad. Me too. He wiped his eyes without shame. God, me too. They waited another hour in silence, less fraught than before, tension replaced by exhausted relief. When the nurse finally came to bring Marcus back, he paused at the doorway. You want to meet her? Victoria's heart stuttered. I don't want to intrude. You are not intruding. I'm inviting you. Marcus gestured toward the double doors. Come on. The recovery room was all beeping machines and hushed voices, nurses moving between beds with practiced efficiency. Lily occupied a space near the window. Small body nearly lost in hospital equipment, but her eyes were open and tracking movement. Daddy. Her voice came hoarse from intubation, but unmistakably glad. Hey, sweetheart. Marcus took her hand, carefully mindful of IV lines. You did great. Doctor says you're going to be just fine. Lily's gaze found Victoria standing awkwardly behind Marcus. Who's that? That's Victoria. She's She's a friend. Marcus's hesitation before the word made it more meaningful. She wanted to meet you. Hi, Lily. Victoria stepped closer, keeping her voice gentle. I'm glad you're okay. Did you bring the purple elephant? Lily's question came with the directness of children who hadn't learned social filtering yet. What purple elephant from the store? The one I wanted. Daddy said not today, but maybe someday. Lily's eyes were already drooping, medication pulling her under. Is it someday yet? Victoria looked at Marcus, who shrugged with the exhaustion of someone beyond caring about pride. Yeah, I think it's someday. I'll bring it tomorrow, okay? Okay. Lily smiled, genuine pleasure visible even through post-surgical haze. Thank you, friend Victoria. She drifted back to sleep, monitors beeping steady reassurance. Marcus stood watching her breathe for a long moment before turning to Victoria. You don't have to buy her anything. I want to. Victoria surprised herself with how much she meant it. She asked for it, she deserves it, and I'd like to give it to her, if that's okay with you. Marcus studied her face, reading motivations or sincerity or something. Finally, okay, thank you. They left the recovery room together, footsteps echoing in hospital hallways built for urgency and grief. Outside the entrance, Boston morning had turned to afternoon sun, breaking through November clouds and temporary brightness. Thank you for being here. Marcus stopped at the curb where Victoria's Mercedes waited in visitor parking. Didn't expect you to come, but it helped having you there. I'm glad I could be here. Victoria pulled out her keys, suddenly uncertain how to end this interaction. Marcus, I know I can't undo what my father did to you, but I'm trying to do better, to be better. I hope you can see that. I do see it. He met her eyes directly. You could have written a check and walked away. Instead, you lost your trust fund and your father's respect standing up for someone you didn't know. That means something. Does it mean you trust me? Marcus smiled, tired but genuine. It means I'm starting to. Trust has to be earned slowly by people who have been burned. But you're earning it. Keep going. He walked back into the hospital, presumably to sit with Lily while she slept. Victoria got in her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine, letting herself feel the strange lightness in her chest that might have been hope or might have been the beginning of actual friendship. She'd lost her father and her inheritance and the life she'd built on foundations of privilege and ignorance. But she'd gained something more valuable, the possibility of becoming someone worth knowing, someone who chose right over comfortable someone Marcus Brennan might eventually trust completely. It was a fair trade, more than fair. Victoria drove home to her apartment, the new one in Jamaica Plain, one bedroom with questionable heating, $1,200 a month instead of $12,000, and felt more at peace than she'd ever felt in the Beacon Hill penthouse. Wealth measured differently now, not in bank accounts or trust funds, but in knowing she'd done the right thing even when it cost everything. Tomorrow she'd buy a purple elephant and bring it to a little girl she barely knew. Next week she'd start her job at the housing advocacy nonprofit entry-level position that paid $42,000 annually. Next month she'd keep learning how to be useful instead of decorative. The ice was gone. What remained was human flawed struggling and infinitely more real than what she'd been before. Victoria Ashford was finally becoming a woman who deserved the second chance she'd been given. 6 months later, Victoria knocked on Marcus's door with the nervous energy of someone still not entirely certain of their welcome. He'd texted earlier asking if she wanted to stop by, casual invitation that had suggested their relationship had evolved past formality into something resembling actual friendship. The apartment looked different somehow, not physically changed, but a lighter. Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator, colorful chaos of 8-year-old creativity, new curtains in the kitchen window. Small changes that meant things were better. Marcus gestured her toward the couch, clearing Lily's homework to make space. She's at Rachel's for a play date. Gives me 2 hours of peace before the whirlwind returns. How's she doing? Great. Last checkup showed everything healing perfectly. Doctor says she can start playing more actively, doesn't need to be quite so careful anymore. Marcus smiled with the particular relief of a parent whose child's prognosis improved. She's basically a normal kid now. Well, normal for Lily, which means she still moves like she's made of glass sometimes, but we're working on it. And you? Victoria accepted the water he offered, noting the changes in his appearance too. He looked rested in ways he hadn't 6 months ago. The perpetual exhaustion faded into something healthier. Working. Hayes Home Repair is actually a real business now, instead of just me with a toolbox. Got 3 regular contracts hired, 2 part-time helpers, making enough to actually save money instead of just treading water. He sat in the armchair across from her. It's good, really good, I'm glad. Victoria meant it without reservation. You deserve good things, so do you. How's the nonprofit work? Exhausting in the best way. I'm coordinating grant applications now, which means I actually have to understand how funding mechanisms work, instead of just writing checks. Victoria laughed. Turns out there's a huge difference between giving money and helping people get resources they need. I'm learning. Promoted already? Marcus raised his eyebrows. 6 months and you're coordinating grants. They needed someone who understood how wealthy donors think. Apparently, 30 years of being useless prepared me perfectly for translating need into language that opens checkbooks. Victoria set down her water. It's strange. I thought losing the trust fund would feel like losing everything. Instead, it feels like I finally found something worth having, which is purpose. She met his eyes, being useful instead of decorative, helping people instead of judging them, becoming someone I can actually respect. Silence settled between them, comfortable instead of awkward. Through the window, Dorchester afternoon continued in its ordinary way, kids playing neighbors, talking life, happening in all its messy beauty. I was wrong about you, Marcus spoke quietly. When you first gave me that credit card, I thought you were the worst kind of rich person, treating poverty like entertainment, trying to prove we're all irresponsible. But you actually listened. You actually changed. That's rare. I was wrong about everything. Victoria felt the familiar shame, duller now but still present, about poverty, about character, about what makes people worthy of respect. You taught me that by showing me what actual integrity looks like, by using your card for hospital bills instead of TV. He smiled slightly, low bar for integrity, by refusing help until it was truly help instead of charity, by demanding apology along with money, by treating dignity like it matters more than comfort. Victoria leaned forward. Marcus, you proved that how someone uses resources matters more than how much they have. That's worth learning. Money shows you how rich someone is. Marcus's voice carried the weight of lived experience. How they spend it shows you who they are. The words settled into Victoria's chest, truth recognized on contact. She'd been wealthy her whole life, but never understood what wealth actually meant until Marcus used her credit card to keep his daughter alive instead of entertaining himself. Value and character couldn't be measured in bank accounts. She'd learned that lesson too late and at too high a cost, but she'd learned it. Her phone buzzed with a text from work grant deadline reminder. She glanced at it and smiled. Actually have to earn my salary now. Still getting used to that. How terrible for you. Marcus's tone carried gentle mockery she'd learned to recognize as affection. Having to work like regular people. It's the worst, but also the best. Victoria stood checking the time. I should go. Let you have peace before Lily gets back. You're always welcome here. Marcus walked her to the door. I mean that. You're not a charity worker checking on your project. You're a friend. Those are different things. The distinction mattered more than he probably realized. Victoria had spent 6 months terrified that Marcus saw her presence as obligation or performance, wealthy girl trying to absolve guilt through proximity. Knowing he considered her actual friend felt like earning something precious. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I could be better. Not everyone would have. Not everyone needed to be better as much as you did. He smiled to take the sting out. But yeah, you earned it. Keep earning it. She left with that mandate clear, descended 3 flights of stairs that no longer felt like descent into foreign territory, emerged onto Dorchester streets. She'd learned to navigate like neighborhood resident instead of tourist. The Mercedes was gone, sold 3 months ago. She took the T, now public transportation, teaching her about the city in ways driving never had. Victoria's life was smaller in every measurable way. Smaller apartment, smaller income, smaller social circle. But it felt larger somehow, filled with purpose and genuine connection instead of expensive emptiness. She'd traded privilege for meaning and discovered meaning was worth infinitely more. Her phone rang on the subway ride home. Unknown number, which she answered cautiously. Victoria, it's your mother. They'd spoken twice in 6 months, brief conversations where Caroline Ashford expressed concern about her daughter's choices without quite condemning them. Victoria braced for another lecture about throwing away opportunities. Instead, I'm proud of you. What you did, standing up to your father, helping that man working at the nonprofit. Your grandmother would have been proud too. Carolyn's voice carried emotion Victoria wasn't used to hearing. The Ashford women have always been stronger than the Ashford men. Just took you 30 years to realize it, Mom. Victoria's voice caught. Thank you. Your father will come around eventually. He's stubborn, but he's not stupid. He'll realize what he lost when he cut you off. Carolyn paused. I should have said something sooner. Should have supported you. I'm sorry I didn't. It's okay. Victoria wiped her eyes, fellow passengers politely ignoring the crying woman on the orange line. You're saying it now. That matters. They talked for the rest of the ride, careful bridges being built over 6 months of silence. When Victoria hung up, she felt lighter. Another relationship tentatively healing. Not everything she'd broken was irreparable. Some things could be fixed with time and effort and willingness to keep trying. The work was hard. The life was smaller. The future was uncertain in ways that would have terrified the version of herself who'd handed Marcus her credit card at a gala. But Victoria wouldn't trade any of it for the comfortable numbness she'd existed in before. Feeling things, even difficult things, meant being alive in ways she'd never experienced during 30 years of expensive emptiness. She was becoming someone worth knowing. The process hurt, but the destination was worth it. 2 years after the night at the gala, Victoria stood on a small stage in a Jamaica Plain community center, looking out at 100 faces gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Hayes Housing Initiative had grown from idea to reality in 24 months, nonprofit dedicated to helping families facing medical debt stay housed through crisis. 47 families assisted so far with funding secured for significant expansion. The name had been Marcus's suggestion, or rather his insistence that Victoria not name it after herself. If you're naming it after anyone, name it after someone who actually lived through housing insecurity. Victoria had agreed immediately, understanding that symbolic gestures mattered less than actual impact. Marcus and Lily sat in the front row, the girl now 10 and healthy, moving with normal childhood energy instead of cardiac patient caution. Maggie O'Donnell sat beside them, knitting something orange. Rachel Murphy wrangled Mia in the row behind. Patty Sullivan had closed the pub for the afternoon to attend. The community that had supported Marcus through his worst years had turned out to celebrate his success. And in the back row alone sat Graham Ashford. Victoria had not invited her father, hadn't spoken to him in 2 years beyond lawyers handling trust fund dissolution and inheritance restructuring. Seeing him here made her hands shake against the podium, old fear and old anger mixing into something she couldn't quite name. She forced her attention back to the speech, to the words she'd prepared about housing insecurity and medical debt and the systems that crush people who deserve better. Good morning. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the Hayes Housing Initiative's official opening. 2 years ago, I thought I understood poverty. I was completely, devastatingly wrong. Gentle laughter from the audience, recognition of admission they'd heard before. A man taught me that understanding requires listening. That judgment should wait until you've walked the path yourself. That character can't be measured by bank accounts or social position. She looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. That man is Marcus Brennan, and this initiative exists because he showed me what integrity actually looks like. More about the organization, about funding sources, about families already helped. Victoria kept it brief, knowing speeches mattered less than actions. The ribbon cutting itself took seconds, ceremonial scissors slicing through red ribbon while cameras flashed and people applauded. Afterward, during the reception, Graham approached slowly, like someone walking into uncertain territory. Victoria. Her father looked older. Gray, more prominent shoulders, less squared. That was a good speech. Thank you for coming. Victoria kept her voice neutral, unsure what this conversation was building toward. Graham gestured toward the initiative information displayed on tables. You've done impressive work here. 47 families in 2 years is significant impact for a startup nonprofit. We had good initial funding and strong community support. The words came professionally, the distance between them thick enough to touch. Her father hesitated, vulnerability visible in the pause. I was wrong. About Marcus Brennan, about the termination, about how I treated you when you confronted me. I made decisions that protected my pride instead of protecting what was right. The apology landed like earthquake, rearranging Victoria's understanding of what was possible. Her father admitting wrongdoing was something she'd never expected to witness. I'm glad you can see that now. Took me 2 years. Graham managed something approximating a smile. Stubbornness runs in the family. But your mother pointed out that I was losing my daughter over pride, and that's a trade no father should make. He paused. I'm sorry, Victoria, for all of it. Victoria felt tears threatening but held them back through effort. Thank you. That means more than you probably realize. I know I can't undo what I did. To Marcus, to you, to our relationship. But I'm trying to do better. Ashford Development has new safety protocols, new whistleblower protections, independent review of termination decisions. Graham's voice carried genuine remorse. Can't fix the past, but maybe I can prevent the same thing happening to someone else. That's good. Real change instead of just words. Victoria swallowed hard. I'm glad. They stood in awkward silence until Graham spoke again. Any chance your old man could take you to dinner sometime? Start rebuilding what I broke? I'd like that. Victoria surprised herself with how much she meant it. But Dad, I'm not coming back to the trust fund or the old life. This is who I am now. The nonprofit work, the small apartment, the friendships with people you probably wouldn't have let in our house 2 years ago. This is my life, I know, and I'm proud of you for it. Graham's voice cracked slightly. More proud than I ever was when you were just attending galas and spending money. You found purpose. That's worth more than any inheritance I could give you. Marcus approached before Victoria could respond, Lily trailing behind him. Excuse me, Mr. Ashford. Could I speak with you briefly? Graham straightened, tension visible. Of course, I wanted to say thank you. Marcus extended his hand. The settlement changed my life, Lily's life. What you paid couldn't fix the past, but it secured our future. And the statement on your company website acknowledging the error meant something to me. Still does. Graham took the offered hand, shaking it with visible emotion. I'm sorry for what happened, for how long it took me to do the right thing, for all of it. Apologies matter. Marcus's voice carried the weight of experience. But actions matter more. I hear you changed company policies. That's the kind of action that protects the next person. Lily tugged her father's sleeve. Daddy, can I go play with Mia? Sure, sweetheart. Marcus watched her run off, then turned back to Graham. She's 10, healthy, active, living a normal childhood because the settlement paid for surgery and medications and follow-up care. That's what your money actually bought. Not absolution, but a future. Thought you should know. Thank you for telling me. Graham's composure wavered. I'm glad she's well. After Marcus left to supervise children, Graham turned to Victoria. He's a better man than I gave him credit for. Hell, he's a better man than I am. He is. But you're trying to be better. That counts for something. Victoria touched her father's arm briefly. We're all trying to be better. That's what growth looks like. The reception continued around them, community celebrating initiative that would help families avoid the crisis Marcus had survived. Victoria watched Lily play with other children, moving without the careful deliberation that had defined her first 8 years. Watched Marcus talk with Patty, the easy friendship of men who'd supported each other through hard times. Watched her father standing awkwardly at the edges trying to find his place in a world he'd never bothered understanding before. Money shows you how rich someone is. How they spend it shows you who they are. Marcus's words from months ago embedded in her memory like fundamental truth. Victoria had been rich her whole life, but understood wealth only in the last 2 years. Real wealth wasn't trust funds or penthouses or platinum credit cards. It was purpose connection, the knowledge that your existence helped others instead of just taking up space. She'd traded financial security for moral clarity, and discovered clarity was worth infinitely more. The Hayes Housing Initiative would help hundreds of families over the coming years, preventing medical debt from destroying housing security the way it nearly destroyed Marcus. That mattered more than anything Victoria had accomplished in 30 years of expensive uselessness. She'd given a stranger her credit card as a social experiment, expecting to prove people like him wasted resources on frivolous things. Instead, Marcus had proven that character couldn't be measured by bank accounts, that how someone spent mattered infinitely more than how much they had. That dignity and integrity existed independent of wealth. The lesson had cost Victoria everything comfortable about her old life. But it had given her something invaluable, the chance to become someone worth respecting, someone who chose right over easy, someone Marcus Brennan considered a genuine friend. Marcus approached as the crowd began thinning, Lily holding his hand. We're heading out. Long day for this one. Thank you for coming. For everything. Victoria knelt to Lily's level. How's the purple elephant? Perfect. Lily's grin showed missing tooth. She sleeps with me every night. Thank you again, friend Victoria. The designation still made Victoria's chest tight, friend Victoria. Not charity worker Victoria or rich lady Victoria, just friend. After they left, Victoria helped volunteers clean up breaking down tables and packing away leftover food. Her father stayed to help, awkward but trying, the two of them working in companionable silence towards something resembling reconciliation. Outside, November evening settled over Jamaica Plain with the particular chill that announced winter's approach. Victoria locked the community center doors and stood on the steps looking at the neighborhood she'd learned to call home. So different from Beacon Hill, so much more real. Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus relayed, wanted me to tell you the purple elephant says thank you too. Also dinner next week. My place, nothing fancy, just wanted to say thanks properly. Victoria smiled, typing back, I'd like that very much. The reply came quick. Good. See you then, friend. Friend. The word that meant more than any title she'd held before, more than any inheritance she'd given up. Victoria Ashford had spent 30 years being wealthy and 2 years learning what actually mattered. The education had cost everything and been worth every penny. She walked toward the tea station, heading home to her small apartment with questionable heating, and felt more at peace than she'd ever felt in the Beacon Hill penthouse. The ice had melted years ago. What remained was human, flawed, purposeful, and finally genuinely alive. Sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was accept help, not because they were weak, but because they loved something more than their own pride. Marcus had taught her that, and Victoria had learned that wealth meant nothing if you spent it protecting comfort instead of pursuing justice. The city lights came on as darkness fell, Boston settling into evening routine. Somewhere in Dorchester, a father read his daughter stories about courage and perseverance. Somewhere in Beacon Hill, a man examined his conscience and found it wanting. And somewhere between those two worlds, a woman who'd lost everything superficial discovered she'd gained everything that mattered. The experiment had proven exactly the opposite of what Victoria intended. But that was fine. Being wrong had been the best thing that ever happened to her. She smiled into the November wind and headed home.